So, uh, good afternoon, morning, evening, depends wherever you are. From Italy, we have a new World Econ, Jan from US, Alex, History Legends from Canada. So, today we will try to make a format that will be a little bit shorter than usual because we found that the last four streams we were a little bit longer than we wanted. So let's try. Some news from the organization of the streams. I already planned with the groups of the speakers other, I think, 10 streams from the next weeks. The new surprises of the streams will be a little bit of new nationalities. So we catch some streamers from India, some streamers from Russia, others from South America. I'm trying to catch in someone from China, and we will have a panel this week. At the end, I will give it to you and information about it from Australia. And this panel will be centralized and focused on Central Asia. So for today, let's start with the stream. I will give a stand to Jan. So for any question that you want to share with us, put it on the chat. I have already collected some questions from the previous streams that we will answer. So for anything that you want, please write to us. Jan, I give to you the slides.
Well, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to speak here with you guys. Alex, I enjoy your show, so I like the opportunity to get up here and talk with you guys and discuss the problems going on in the world. And speaking of Russia and a lot of these global geopolitical issues that are going on today, a big factor of that is actually energy. So I thought it would be a great time to get like a good 30-minute presentation and give you guys an idea of the global energy picture. Some of this stuff you guys already know. I'm gonna proceed as if the audience is very much unaware of what's going on in global energy politics. So, um, let me see if I can figure out the slides. Here we go. So, we've talked in the past about the global free trade order, which is led by the United States, and a little bit of background on that, and pretty much the reason why it exists. After World War II, the idea was to enforce peace globally in exchange for commerce. So, kind of a big reason why World War II happened in the first place. Countries like Japan and Germany were growing economically at a very quick rate. They had very large populations to support, both close to, or pushing towards 100 million. And they had large industries to fuel and large consumer bases to satisfy. But neither country had the raw materials in order to meet all of these demands. For Germany, they had the iron, they had the steel, they had coal, and they had some of these other materials that they need, but they had virtually no energy, no oil whatsoever. And in terms of Japan, they didn't have any of it. They needed to go. Both nations needed to go out and conquer whatever territory and gain whatever resources they lacked in order to survive. So, I mean, there's obviously ideological aspects to that. You have like fascism and various other things, and it definitely plays a part. But the bigger part is the lack of resources. So, the main idea for the global free trade order is if we allowed all nations around the world to have access to these materials, virtually free of tax and tariff. If we were to defend the supply chains with the U.S. Navy for all those materials in energy products, oil, what have you, then there would be no need for wars of expansion, right? And that was a pretty good read of the situation at the time, and it worked. Obviously, for close to 80 years, we've had relative peace among the major powers. So the primary need of an industrial economy is obviously energy, right? So while a lot of these resources that have been traded have been raw materials like iron and aluminum and bauxite, and I mean, you name it, just the list goes on and on. Energy is the main one, because without energy, none of it works. So a little brief history of energy, in the lead up to World War II. So like 1800s on. Kind of the steam pump is like a great waypoint to start with. It was invented originally just to pump water out of coal mines. So as you can see, like the energy industrialization scene is already kind of going at this point. Uh, Factories are already present and they already need coal. But the invention of the steam pump quickly developed into the steam engine, which a lot of people are very much aware of. They uh, basically led to the creation of trains and rail transport, along with steam powered ships, or essentially coal powered ships. But the coal was the primary input source for these machines in the early phases, but it was very manpower intensive, and eventually it just oil once the large deposits in Pennsylvania and Texas were discovered, and once it could be produced in mass, it turned out it was a lot easier to move around oil. It was a lot less manpower intensive, and it was a lot more energy dense. So quickly, oil took over as the preferred hydrocarbon on the high seas. And it's important to really just focus on ocean transport, because that's the foundation of the global free trade order, right? Like most movement of goods happens on water. But a good bit of it does happen on land. So World War II strategy was actually highly influenced by the sourcing of oil, and the main event you can think of for this point is the Battle of Stalingrad between the Soviet Union and the Nazi German forces. If you look here, this is a modern day map to give you guys an idea of like what's where, but pretty early on in the assault into the Soviet Union, the Germans actually pushed very, very close to Moscow. And a very famous and rather brilliant general on the Nazi side, Heinz Guderian, was a tank commander, and he was pushing very hard for the German command to allow him to assault and capture Moscow. So the idea was, is if they can capture Moscow and secure it, they could eventually capture and secure St. Petersburg as well. They'd have the capital, the cultural capital. The war would virtually be over. Russia wouldn't be able to hang on for very much longer. But he lost out to basically Adolf Hitler's side of the argument. They thought that the best way to win the war was to secure the resources first. So they transferred vast amounts of German resources in the army effort to the south in order to capture the Caucasus. And the main target here was the city of Baku and the oil fields around it, which is in modern day Azerbaijan. You can see this crude little drawing I made of like an oil tower there. I was impressed with it at the time, but the more I look at it, it's hideous. So, in order to do that, they needed to secure the Volga River. For one, they needed to cut off all Russian supplies to the Caucasus, which would have moved down through this area right here. And for two, it would have made a good geographic boundary to basically hold back the war effort in order to secure the Caucasus and to start distributing the oil supplies. So the main uh, I guess you could say objective was the city of Stalingrad, which you see in this little elbow here of the river. That's where it was located, and that's ultimately where the Germans lost the war in the defeat of Stalingrad. So, oil played a big part even in World War II. So, post World War II history of energy, oil dominates the discussion. In the 1950s, almost half of all global oil production was in the U.S. But by the 1990s, the U.S. ended up becoming a net importer of crude, and they had a consumption level of around 15 million barrels per day of oil. So one of the reasons in that change was just the demand spikes in oil. Like as technology progressed, you have massive expansions of industries such as automobile, transport industry. If you think about just the foundations of global free trade in general, it suggests that there's going to be a lot more movement on the seas. So, larger and more ships are being built, cargo ships, oil transport ships, all these, all ships of all kinds are using oil. So, demand is going up. Demand outstrips supply in a lot of the original oil fields that were discovered, like Pennsylvania, Texas, and many of these places. So the most sought after crude is what you'd call light sweet, and it has the viscosity of about maple syrup. If you can imagine, it's golden color. It's kind of runny. It's really easy to refine down into gasoline and many other products. But that most of that light sweet, not all, but most of it has been tapped out, especially some of the traditional supplies. One of the only places left. Pre 2014 that you could get it was Saudi Arabia, which it seems like they have endless supplies of it there. So, um, in order to kind of fix that issue there, U.S. refineries retooled to handle dirtier crudes like Venezuelan heavy bitumen or Canadian oil sands, and European refiners more or less still seek out this like light sweet crude, and then Asian refiners will take virtually anything because they're kind of last on the list for purchasing. So they'll end up buying Venezuelan crude sometimes, and then they don't have the technical capacity to refine it, so they'll just wait until they get like a load of light sweet in, and then they'll blend it together into something a little thinner that the refineries can handle. But just to give you an idea of like the difference between light sweet, which is like maple syrup, and Canadian oil sands. Canadian oil sands, in its current form, is a solid. It's actually a solid, and it doesn't turn into anything that resembles a liquid until you heat it up past 300 degrees. So, very very difficult to refine something like that into gasoline, but that just kind of shows the technical capacity of U.S. refineries. They do it every day in the level of millions of barrels per day. So this situation kind of has forced the U.S. to have a permanent military presence in the Persian Gulf and an uneasy alliance with Saudi Arabia, which is or was the world's largest producer of oil in the 90s. And the reason for that isn't specifically because the U.S. was purchasing Saudi oil. Most U.S. oil was actually coming from Venezuela, the African coast. I guess you could say the West African coast and Algeria were our main suppliers. But because it's a global free trade order, it's a global market. So if prices go up because oil's taken offline, then that affects everyone, no matter where you're buying your oil from. This isn't like the age of empire; it's the age of free trade. So you're working with these global markets. So Saudi Arabia is one of the highest producers in the world, and in an area of the world that's at highest risk of disruption of oil supplies. So most of that oil is going to either Asia or Europe, and America actually essentially was protecting European and Asian oil in the Gulf Wars, and that's what we're going to talk about next. So, um, the Gulf Wars is supposed to be the aftermath of the Gulf Wars, but when people say the Iraqi invasions were not about WNDs, they were about oil. Well, duh. They're obviously about oil, but the mistake they made is about whose oil it was. A lot of people and a lot of conspiracy theories are surrounded around, the U.S. were after Iraqi oil, like we were trying to, move in and steal the Iraqi oil and things like that. But it was actually about Saudi oil. So when Saddam ordered his troops to invade Kuwait, that placed about 1 million-man Iraqi army with hundreds of tanks less than 150 kilometers from the Abqaiq oil facility, which is the largest and most important oil processing or really energy infrastructure in the entire world. You're talking about 12.5% of global oil production moving through one single facility. So if Iraq has designs on moving into Saudi Arabia and into the Saudi oil fields. Doesn't matter if they capture it or not. It's very likely that if this would have happened, U.S. Air Force would have probably destroyed the Iraqi army and forced a retreat, but not without damage to these oil-producing facilities. So the way I see the Gulf War, and people see it in a lot of different ways, but like from basic economic standpoint, the two Gulf Wars were basically a two-phase operation. First was to push the Iraqi army away from Saudi oil fields by retaking Kuwait. So a lot less about Kuwaiti sovereignty and a lot more about protecting global free trade. As you can see, global free trade is the much more important aspect of this than Kuwait, which is a very very tiny country, which obviously deserves their sovereignty, but um, it doesn't have a higher importance than global oil supplies. And then the second phase of that was the second Iraqi war, which focused on dismantling the Iraqi military entirely. And then I would argue a third phase of that would have been the occupation of Iraq and the subsequent using Iraq as a base to go after, uh, you know, I guess you could say terrorists and Al Qaeda throughout the Middle East, the people responsible for 9/11. And this is where I believe the real mistakes were what began to happen was with the occupation of Iraq. But that's a whole nother topic to discuss. So meanwhile, while all this was happening in the Middle East, while the U.S. was putting forth these efforts to protect global oil supplies, they were making moves at home to change the situation. So this brings us to the shale revolution. And the shale revolution, I would say, is probably the most profound advance in extraction technology since the discovery of oil. So it's a combination of horizontal drilling, hydraulic fracturing, and seismic imaging. Three technologies that have actually existed for a long time, but were never really put together, or a lot longer than fracking has been around. They've existed, but this is the first time they put them together. And the idea behind this is when you're talking global oil supplies, only about 1/5 of global oil actually collects into these traditional oil pockets underground. Well, like when you think of Saudi Arabia or Texas or Pennsylvania, like all these big oil discoveries, they're basically just big like blobs of oil that had seeped through the ground and collected in a specific location, and there was billions of barrels of oil sometimes in like one patch, and only about 1/5 of global oil collects in areas like this. 4/5, 80% of all global oil actually is trapped in between shale layers of rock, and sometimes micro pockets like the size of like a penny or a nickel, just small tiny pockets of oil, and they just never had the opportunity to I guess seep through the rock and collect in like one location. So this technology enabled the U.S. to exploit that. So basically, uh, there was a massive amount of oil that was unlocked in the U.S. over the last decade or so, and it has largely made the U.S. Energy independent. And we're going to discuss in a minute what that actually means. It's a little more complicated than you would think. So the shale revolution, an important thing to note here is only possible in a high price environment. So this was a brand new technology, never been used before. So it only worked if you have oil on the international markets at $100 a barrel, right? Because it's never been tried before, and they figure out very quickly that the best profit they can make early on is about they make break even at about $75 a barrel. So if price is at $100 a barrel, then it doing oil like this is profitable. But if price drops below $75 a barrel, all these shale operators go out of business, right? So this actually interesting little side note. It goes into a price war where Saudi Arabia sees kind of the threat in terms of market share of U.S. shale, and they start overproducing their oil and flooding the market with all kinds of excess supply. So basic supply and demand economics. If you're unaware, just Google supply and demand. It's very simple. It's Econ 101. But the higher the supply or the higher level that supply outstrips demand, the lower the price ends up going. So oil is everywhere. Oil is cheap, and the idea of this is in the time frame of like 2014, is if Saudi Arabia can keep oil cheap enough for long enough, they can put all American shale operators out of business. Well, it didn't really work. There was a lot of different technologies that were like in their infant phase and developing, and it's actually very interesting to look at this from like a technological revolution aspect and the way things develop. But they ended up at the end of it cutting a lot of costs, implementing a lot of new technologies, going back and re-drilling old well pads and stuff to save money. And the functional or the break-even cost of U.S. shale is now about $40 a barrel, which is very, very low. It's actually one of the cheaper oils available in the world now. So while Saudis they were successful in putting some U.S. shale out of business, they ended up getting gobbled up in the big fish, little fish internal. I guess you could say capitalism that was going on in the U.S. shale sector. So the other things that made this possible was it had to happen inside a technically advanced country, and it had to happen in a country with the right geography. And if you look at the world, in all the shale patches around the world, the U.S. is shale patches, which it has several, are the only ones located in a country wealthy enough to be able to afford to exploit them. Uh, in a country that's technically advanced enough, so that has enough petroleum engineers and other highly skilled college educated peoples, and then has enough or has the right geography in order to exploit it. Like you look at some of these other countries around the world, like China technically has one of the largest shale patches in the world, but in terms of geography, it's the technology still doesn't exist to this day to really exploit it. It's like a stacked, layered, it's not all in one place. It's spread out. It's not cost effective to even drill for it there. Other countries like France or the Netherlands, they have large shale patches, but they're located directly under their population centers. So the largest shale patch in France is directly under Paris, and you're not going to see fracking in the middle of Paris. Like, it's just not going to happen. It's politically impossible in Europe at this point, but eventually they might have to start looking into exploiting these shale patches. So energy independence. So technically speaking, with this situation where the U.S. now can produce the oil that it needs, it's no longer forced to intervene in oil producing regions for its own national security. So you have the situation in Saudi Arabia where, even though we're not buying Saudi or Persian Gulf oil, it affects global price. So if something happens there, we can we're screwed just like everyone else is in terms of prices. So now that we produce all of our own oil, we can just cut off exports. And if you cut off exports, we have everything we need inside the country. The price goes down significantly. So it's no longer in our own national security interests to intervene in these places. And when we do so, it's only on behalf of the international or the global community. We're not doing it for ourselves. We have no benefit in it, essentially, unless our benefit is to keep the international community going, which we've talked about the arguments around that before. The U.S. Is a net exporter of energy, but it still does import many million barrels of oil per day because of the refining situation we talked about. So, uh, what's important there is like we're still slightly vulnerable, but like in a different way. So, frackers, this fracking revolution actually produces a lot of light sweet oil. We've basically since 2014 retapped light sweet and brought it back to the market. It's a big thing again, but retooling an oil refinery takes a lot of time, takes billions of dollars. You basically got to gut it, rebuild it, and all the equipment. It needs. It's very, very technical. We won't get too much into that, but what we end up doing is we end up selling. Say I'm just gonna throw some numbers out there. We end up selling like 7 or 8 million barrels per day to the international market, and we end up buying back like 5 or 6 million barrels a day of the heavier stuff that our refineries can handle. Right. So we technically are a energy independent and a net energy exporter. but we still are at risk to international price swings. So it still can be a problem. So if global oil markets gets turned on its head, so let's say you have this situation with Ukraine and Russia where let's just imagine that 100% of Russian oil is cut offline. It's about 13% of global oil demand. Actually, check that. 13.1% of global oil supply comes from Russia. So as you can imagine, that would be a pretty huge price swing. And then let's say a war breaks out between Iran and Saudi Arabia. That's another 12.1% coming from Saudi Arabia, and somewhere around the range of like 3 to 4% of global oil coming from Iran. So now you have a situation where over a quarter of global oil is offline theoretically. So in 2021, the U.S. Congress and president, signed into law an act that allowed the U.S. president the authority to ban exports of U.S. oil in the case of a national emergency. So, say, oil per barrel price goes up to $200 a barrel. Joe Biden or whoever the president is at the time would then be obligated to implement the act and cut off the American markets from global oil supply. This has a lot of global implications because the U.S. actually produces 14.5% of global oil supply, but internally, the problems around price and the economy could be solved in that way. So that's how the U.S. has kind of a get out of jail free card in the oil situation, where most other countries don't. So this is a good time to talk real quick about price. Just a real quick econ lesson. This is a econ 101, very simple uh, way to look at pricing. We call this elasticity of demand, and I took this directly from, and want to cite my sources, but this is just the definition that comes directly from Investopedia. So rather than giving you my own words, I'll give you Investopedia's. So price elasticity of demand is a measurement of the change in consumption of a product in relation to a change in its price. So a good is elastic if a price causes a substantial change in demand or supply. So imagine I don't know. Like the example that I always have is like a little outdated because I heard it, like 5 or 6 years ago, uh, when I was in college. But like they would, and then the professor was old too, so that that was the thing. But like, you imagine Justin Bieber CDs. Like back in the day, you'd pay $20 for a Justin Bieber CD, right? So let's say they raised the price to $40. The demand for those Bieber CDs is going to absolutely plummet. Like, there's no way anyone's paying $40 for a Bieber CD, right? Unless you're like a super fan. I gotta have it. You're a believer or whatever. So that's elasticity. You can measure it, and that'd probably best be seen in this graph right here. So if you look at Q2, that's the quantity demanded at P2 at the lower price. So as you can see the curve here, when the price goes up slightly, the demand drops a lot. So like there's definitely a curve there where it's no longer worth it. People are like, I'm not spending $40 on a stupid Bieber CD, right? So a good is inelastic if a price change does not cause very much change in demand or supply. So this is the best way to look at like energy markets, because it doesn't really matter what happens. Energy is so essential to modern life. Like, you wake up in the morning, you turn the lights on, you take a shower, you take a hot shower that's heated up from a water heater that is heated from gas or electricity or whatever. You wash your dishes in the dishwasher, you drive to work in your car. You need that oil and gas. Whether you want it or not, you need it. So looking at an inelastic good in this second graph here, as you can see, when price goes up, or when, say, quantity drops a little bit, price goes up a lot more. And this is just like a base graph, obviously a generic graph. I would say that the curve for elasticity for oil and gas is much, much steeper. You've seen in Europe in the last few years, the price of gas has gone up 400 and 500%, and the demand has remained the same. Inelastic goods can have wild, absolutely wild price swings because people need them. It's absolutely essential. So, and this has definitely affected like the availability of a substitute for a product affects the elasticity. If there's no good substitutes and the product is necessary, demand won't change when the price goes up, making it inelastic. So, I mean, I guess you can think of like hamburgers and hot dogs in this way. Like, let's say the price of beef or the supply of beef like goes way down, so the demand or the supply is low, the price shoots up. Uh, Instead of going to the local stand and getting a hamburger for $10, you're just going to get 2 hot dogs for $1 a piece. It's a substitute good. There is no substitute goods for oil and gas. All right. So that brings us back to this original graph of the energy split global free trade order, leaving out on that point about substitutes, looking at solar, wind, modern biofuels, hydropower, nuclear. All this stuff makes up such a small percentage of actual production of energy globally. The vast majority of it is with oil and gas. Coal is a big part, but mostly every country that burns coal, or in most places around the world, coal's very accessible, and it's everywhere. There's no shortage of coal globally, and it's one of those things that's so heavy, it makes more sense just to produce it locally. You know, but in terms of oil and gas, like they're very specific to where they're coming from. Like they're very, it takes a lot of technical skill to drill for it, depending on how difficult the drill is. It takes a lot of technical skill to extract it, to ship it. You need a lot of financial markets involved, so you need some wealthy countries involved in this kind of thing. It's a very vulnerable sector, and it plays a lot into this whole globalization narrative and how everything is like kind of going downhill really quickly. The reason why it's going downhill really quickly is definitely surrounding energy and oil. You've seen the wild price swings in Europe because of sanctions on Russian oil and gas. You've actually seen those echo throughout the world. Um, and you've seen a lot of drama involving like the U.S. president lately trying to go around the world and asking for increases in supply. They've recently flirted with talking to Venezuela to get them to increase supply. They actually went to Saudi Arabia to ask them to increase supply. They've talked not so much in recent weeks, but before about quickly getting a deal with Iran on the nuclear issue, so they can get Iranian oil back onto the market. Everyone is aware of how catastrophic this issue can be, but I'm very skeptical on how quickly they can solve it, because these are the types of things that takes a long time to sort out. Like in America, it could be 6 months from the time they clear out a site to build a pad and start fracking, and when the well actually starts producing oil. For a traditional oil patch, you could be looking at 3, 4, maybe even 5 years, depending on how difficult it is. So I'm going to wrap it up there to open up for Q&A. There's a lot more to unpack in all of this, but I think it's probably best that you guys ask the questions rather than me keep rambling on about it. So that's it. I'll give it back to you, Stefano.
Okay, perfect. So let's see. We have a question. Firstly, on your speech. Okay, Alex, if you want to make any question.
Yeah, just before I forget, like, because just did your presentation, so if I ask the questions now, I think it's better. Do you think the war in Ukraine is energy related? Do you think it's one of the main causes? After your presentation, after everything you told us about it, do you think the war in Ukraine is energy related? And what would be, second question, the impact on energy of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan? Like, how would it affect global trade?
So it's definitely, I wouldn't say like the Russians have no designs on capturing new energy sources. So I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're asking, but there's a lot of speculation that like Ukraine is resource rich in terms of like gas and oil and some of these things, and it's not. It's really not. It's not at all. Really, like I mean, Ukraine has a super corrupt energy sector. They're a net importer of energy from Russia. So I mean, like there is some prospecting that can be done. I mean, there is definitely oil there, and there's a lot of gas there, especially in the Black Sea, in between Odessa and Sevastopol. There's a lot there, and those are technically territorial waters of Ukraine. So people have made an argument there that like that's like the goal of Russia to capture those fields, but Russia doesn't need any of it. I mean, they're more or less using energy, um, kind of as a political tool again, to fend off the supporters of Ukraine. Now, could Ukraine potentially, under the right circumstances, become a net exporter in energy? It absolutely could. There's probably enough there, but I mean, like I said, Russia doesn't really need it. They have all they need. They're already a net exporter. It would be kind of silly if if the whole reason was they were just super greedy and wanted more and more. I think their reasons are much more security related than that. In terms of Taiwan, now, the risk to global trade in a Chinese invasion of Taiwan is definitely in the semiconductor manufacturing area. Like they're the best technically in terms of making high-end semiconductors, and there's really no other producer globally that can compete with the volume. Like there are some like that can make some of these higher end stuff, but in terms of like the sheer amount of it, it takes a long time to build a semiconductor fab facility. You probably like 4 years minimum. I'm not, that's not my field of expertise, but I know they've been building one in Phoenix, Arizona for quite some time, and I still don't think it's working. But um, in terms of design for those things, most of the designs from it come from America and the EU, like the the scientists that actually are like putting together the semiconductor and saying this is how it needs to be made, but the actual manufacturing process is kind of anchored into Taiwan. In terms of oil and global energy, it doesn't really affect global energy. It vastly would affect Chinese energy consumption. So the vast majority of Chinese energy, whether it be oil or LNG gas, it flows through a series of choke points. The most notable are the Straits of Malacca, or where our friend DPA lives in Singapore. There's absolutely uh, I mean, it's difficult to describe how many oil tankers flow through there on a daily basis on their way to mainly China, but also the Philippines and some of these other countries. Let me think here, like Vietnam, Japan is definitely a big one. So the idea is if China ever engages into a shooting war with Taiwan and America commits to a war with China, they're just going to blockade the Straits of Malacca and completely shut off oil to China, which would starve out the Chinese economy in a very, very short period of time.
We call DPA. DPA immediately send a question for you, and then we have some questions. But let's start with DPA. We miss you a lot, but you will have your stream soon. So, what is damaging US more than high oil price or low oil price?
So that's actually a very good question. It depends on the time period. At current high oil prices, definitely. In terms of low oil prices, that was definitely the idea behind the 2014 Saudi price war with the U.S. It was to basically price the U.S. out of the market, and it didn't work. The U.S. actually ended up in a more resilient position. I would argue $40 a barrel is a really safe oil industry. It's not the cheapest globally, like the Saudis. Um, it's hard to tell what exactly their break-even price is, but a lot of people estimate it to be between $25 and $35 a barrel. So I don't think we can outprice the Saudis. That would be a little crazy, but we can outprice most of the world.
So, first question, me and B, that it's our, let's say, aficionados viewer. We were told that the US is energy independent. Only 3% of our oil came from Russia, but our gas price skyrocketed.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's a great point. And that goes back to the fact that we are energy independent, and the definition of that is we have enough energy for our own uses. It doesn't mean that we're cut off from global markets. We're still attached to these global markets, so we're still susceptible to global price swings. And that comes into, I believe it's actually called literally the Ban Oil Exports Act. Very clever naming that Congress is up to with this one, but it was passed in April of 2021, and basically in a situation where the U.S. economy is under imminent threat because of high oil prices, they can immediately cut off those oil exports. Start retooling the refineries, or in the meantime, we can probably try to process some of this light sweet in U.S. refineries and stuff. And that would basically bring a functional ceiling at least down somewhere below $100 a barrel for oil, probably like $90 or $80 a barrel, maybe lower. I don't know. But what that would do, it would signal that we're completely abandoning the global community. We're completely abandoning our allies in Europe. We're not going to help them with oil at all. We're keeping all of our oil to ourselves. We're abandoning a lot of our Asian allies when we do that. I do think that the U.S. president can make exemptions and allow exports to certain countries. I'm not sure to what extent that'll be done, but it will be a very short list of countries. So, I mean, once that happens, I think that would be the ultimate, the final nail in the coffin for the global free trade community. Like, there's no way that any of these countries would have confidence that we're going to participate anymore if we're not even going to export oil.
If I can say to you about what you said about Venezuela, that is like it's strictly connected to the try to help the Europe about import of oil in this situation. But the only two companies that they were allowed by the US to import from Venezuela were Italian Eni and Spanish Repsol. So it's interesting that in this situation, like the US foreign policy is starting to reattach the connection to Venezuela. I was there, like not in Venezuela, but in Colombia 1 month ago, and it was interesting that the problem inside Venezuela is that they mainly lost the biggest part of engineer in the oil sector because they were replaced by military, and so the problem now is like the total production. It's I don't know 1/5, 1/8 of a real total production. Like Venezuela, it's like Saudi Arabia in South America. But let's see what will happen.
That's an absolutely accurate point. Like the thing with Venezuela is like it's so technically difficult to even get to that heavy bitumen and some of those thicker products. Like if say oil wells and pipelines, if they stop production, you basically have to tear them apart and rebuild them because they get so clogged up with sludge and basically it turns into a solid in the middle of the pipe. It's similar to like Russia's problem. If they stop moving the liquid out of Siberia, it literally freezes in the pipes, and the pipes just burst all the way through. So if they stop production in Siberia, they have to start from scratch basically all over again. And it's kind of a similar issue, maybe not as bad in Venezuela, but to think that you're going to get 1 million extra barrels of Venezuelan crude online in the next 2 years is complete fallacy. Like, it's probably not going to happen.
So okay, This other question that is connected to your, it's incomplete because it's into comments. How the German industries is gonna deal without Russian oil and raw materials in the long range?
I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't think they are. I think Germany is going to fold and decide that it's best for them just to keep buying Russian oil and gas. That's my personal opinion. A lot of people have different opinion. The German government seems to have a different opinion, but you look around the world and where the hell are they going to buy it from? Like some of these, like Africa is like probably the best prospects for it. But they already have customers, so you have to price out their customers, and I think one of the problems that Germany is facing is especially with gas, less so with oil and more with gas, but they have a very privileged contract with Russia for gas. They basically pay a very way below market prices for gas. I'm not exactly sure how much below, like 30-40% below market prices, to the point where it was actually more profitable for Poland to shut down the Yamal pipeline and cut off gas from Russia and start reversing that pipeline and buying Russian gas from Germany.
From
Like
Germany.
apparently, and I didn't know this until recently, but apparently Poland was actually buying Russian gas cheaper from Germany than they were originally buying it from Russia, which is why they drew the line in the sand and was like, we're going to be the first to cut off gas. It's because they could. But the issue with that being is Germany's supplies are now dangerously low. But apparently, like in April and May, some German gas companies were profiting big time off of sales to
Yeah,
Poland.
Jan,
Alex, Alex, go.
I have a question. So the fact that it seems that Britain and the US are the main actors helping Ukraine at the moment, is it possible that they see also a way to weaken Germany? Because, yeah.
I mean, that's definitely a very cynical, a cynical thing if it is true. I don't think so. Um, I think they're very unconcerned about Germany. Obviously, I mean, especially with a lot of the rhetoric, and I think probably like Canada is one of the best examples in this circumstance. Like Canadian Parliament and a lot of the political parties in Canada are very upset about how this gas turbine was returned to Germany, so Germany can return it to Russia. And a lot of Western countries, the U.S. and Britain, have made some similar statements about how like this is bad for Ukraine. It's like they don't I don't think they realize that, like, if Germany would not have gotten that gas turbine, I mean, Germany would be in a state of collapse by November. That's absolutely necessary for German existence is for that pipeline to keep going at this point in time. I'm not saying that they can't eventually like move some oil around from other places in the world, but you're talking like a couple years. Like an LNG export facility or import facility, either or, is not an easy undertaking. These are very technical, complex facilities that require a lot of time and experience and expertise to develop, and tons of money, billions and billions of dollars. So it's like there's some claims that they're going to be able to build some LNG import facilities sometime in the next few months that they started earlier this year, and it's completely out of the realm of possibility if you ask me. I think if they rush it, they can get one of these things open in 2 years, but they're stuck on Russian gas. That's the main part to look at here, and the fact that some of these countries like Canada and UK are kind of going after Germany politically for folding on this issue. This wasn't an issue that they could have, uh, you know, held the line on. They couldn't have held the line on this issue at all. They need that gas. They needed that turbine, and to me, it kind of signals that the UK and Canada and the US care a lot more about Ukraine than they do Germany. Now, does that mean that they want to see Germany collapse? I don't think so.
And do you think the fact that the Germans abandoned their nuclear sector, do you think it also like like shooting themselves in the foot? Do you think what would have been Germany's position today had they had all these nuclear facilities?
I mean, it would still be very, very precarious position. But it would obviously be a little bit better if they didn't shut down some of those, nuclear power plants. I mean, it would. I would imagine be at least like 7 or 8% better, like the percentage of energy that they were getting from them. But yeah, the reason for these nuclear, there's really no reason for shutting down these nuclear plants past just crazy political green ideology in Germany. Like it's gone far beyond even what some of like the green ideology is in like UK and America. Um, the fact about nuclear is it's clean. It's cleaner than gas. It's cleaner than oil. It has the potential to be very bad and dirty if it's ran by idiots. I mean, a certain Chernobyl comes to mind, like when talking about that. But in total, like the total number of people that have died in nuclear accidents compared to even like wind accidents, like people falling off wind towers trying to set them up. There's more people globally that have died falling off of wind towers and have died and from radiation sickness from nuclear power plants. I'm not going to speak to Hiroshima or anything like that. But yeah, it's way safer than oil, gas, and wind in terms of safety of like on-site personnel and
And
safety of
it's
the
also
community.
cleaner, right? Because I
Oh yeah,
just saw an article this morning that said that people imagine this glowy uranium thing, but it's actually contained. Like there's a lot of ways you can even recycle this energy. It's very clean. As
yeah.
people have this image of it, but in the end, it's not too bad.
Yeah, it is very clean. I think all of the nuclear waste in the world can fit on a single football field stacked up like 100 feet or something like that. It's not a lot of nuclear waste, and it can be recycled. But in terms of the efficiency of recycling it versus like acquiring new materials, it's a lot more cost effective to acquire new materials. It's actually pretty expensive to recycle at this point, but that doesn't mean that advances can't be made there.
Let me put you a provocation, and then I have other questions about nuclear waste. I can tell you about the Italian experience because before Chernobyl, you can check it. That it's very interesting because Italy was one of the best technology developer in nuclear. We had also a project of our, let's say, nuclear warheads, whatever. But the main technology was in energy production. The main problem about nuclear waste, it's the actually there is not a permanent depository except one in the world. That it's based in Finland. It's called Oliquoto. There is an interesting documentary if anybody wants to see. It's called Into Eternity. And the main thing is that the radioactivity about this nuclear waste could be least, let's say, about 150 to 200,000 years. And so it's difficult at the actual technology. We don't know in the 100, 200, 300, 1,000 years what will happen. And it's difficult, especially in this situation. Let's think about the nuclear waste that is in the Zaporizhia nuclear plants. In a war scenario, it's not very safe to think about these nuclear plants. What will happen with if there is any attack of the plant? But it's not the core of the question. Okay, so this is for you, Jan. Is currently synthetic fuel an alternative or practical complement to real gas and oil?
I mean, I mean, I'm going to answer this like with some intuitive thinking. I'm not certain on this, but I would say no, mainly because of the carbon output, or not really the carbon, but just like the effort that it takes to create some of the synthetic fuel. I mean, if you think about it, like how many hectares of corn does it take to create, a million barrels of biofuel? Probably a lot. And it actually takes a lot of fertilizer that comes from fuel to grow that, all those hectares of corn. So I think that it's a good way to like temporarily supplement supply. Like if you're low on supply, and you have like 1 million hectares in Iowa that are a little bit bug infested, and you're like, we can't sell this. It's like, all right, well, let's churn it down into some biofuel and some ethanol, like to add to the fuel mix. That'll temporarily solve our supply issue, or by a couple percent. But in terms of a long-term fix for or an alternative to fuel, no, it's not.
Okay, let's move to the next one. Okay. If Russia doesn't need the energy resources in Ukraine, could they just be trying to prevent Europe from accessing them?
My opinion here is that Ukraine, like the fight for Ukraine, has nothing to do with energy. There's definitely raw resources that Europe has their eyes on within Ukraine, but like my personal opinion follows along a little more with geopolitical thinker Peter Zion's opinion on this, is that Russia's goals are to plug geographic gaps that enter onto the eastern parts of the North Eurasian plain. So they want to push to the border of Poland. They want to push to the border of Romania, plug the Bessarabian gap, plug the Polish gap, so they can satisfy their long-term security. This has been the goal of Russia throughout their entire existence. Catherine the Great said, I cannot defend my borders. I have no choice but to expand them. Right? Like, this has always been the Russian issue, and they had solved this issue, at the end of World War II. And this is one of the reasons why Vladimir Putin calls it one of the greatest geopolitical catastrophes in history, is because Russia was in a secure position, and now it's not. It's actually the least secure country in the contemporary world right now. So that can cause them to lash out and do bad things, which is what you're seeing.
Next, would Russia be able to strangle the West on uranium production too?
In the immediate future, yes. The biggest global supplier of uranium is actually Kazakhstan, which is completely surrounded by Russia. So unless we can get a deal with Iran for the Kazakh uranium to get shipped out through like the Caspian Sea or something, which is all this is like not possible. Maybe a deal with Azerbaijan to move uranium from the Caspian Sea, from the Kazakh ports to Baku, and then through Georgia, and then out through Turkey and to the greater world. That's possible in uranium, in terms of like what's needed to power reactors. Such a small amount. It's actually the only fuel in the world that can be moved by plane, like with any kind of cost effectiveness. Like, they can just load up a bit of it on like a C-130 or something, and then ship it across the world and satisfy someone's need for a couple months. So in the short term, yes, there is like a supply problem with uranium. A lot of the uranium mines in the West have been shut down because the U.S. was actually powering its nuclear reactors on dismantled nuclear weapons for a long time. That was the someone mentioned this in a stream. There was like a deal, and it had some kind of name, but they were both the U.S. and Russia were diffusing a lot of the nuclear devices and turning them into fuel rods, basically. So, but in the long term, there's plenty of uranium in Western countries. There's a lot in Canada. There's a lot in Australia. There's some in the U.S. I think there's some in Africa as well. There's actually probably a good bit in Africa.
So another from DPA, but it's not with us, but it's continuing to flood us with questions. So you love us, I know. So what is the latest projection for oil to run out, and what happens if oil goes GG? What are currently seeing the world is not ready for no oil or even low oil. Are we screwed? Only to make an information, as you said, about the gas reserve in Germany, I have to say to you, and I will connect it with the next question. But actually, as I prevented in the previous streams, Italy is in the best position for the gas import. I will explain after. But we are already over 70% of the gas reserves for the winter. So for sure, we will reach the level of security of 90% soon. But I will explain why. The main problem of all these things is still Germany. We will see, because it didn't reach the 60% of the reserves, and the actual average in Europe is 66%. But the main problem is magically after the blow up of Italian government. But I will answer to a question later. We had something that magically changed also in the gas import. Magically, because when government collapsed, magically gas started to flow back in Europe. But we will tell later. So about the oil, if you
So
can
so
answer to the
basically we're talking global. All right, I'm not on mute. Basically, we're talking global oil supplies here, right? So I think this was the original inspiration behind finding alternative energy sources, right? Like the prospecting back in the 80s. Like, I mean, there've always been some people talking about climate change and global warming and things along that line of thought. But the idea was like, well, eventually this oil is going to run out. I mean, I remember growing up, and that was the concern of my parents, and they were like, well, we want some of these things like wind and solar and various other things explored, because there's only a finite amount of anything in existence, like especially like on the planet, like you have so many resources, but once you use them up, they're gone. And it takes millions of years for oil and coal and a lot of these biofuels to reform. So that was the original thought behind it. But like I said, like if you look back at the presentation, in terms of like discovered oil supplies, 20% of the world's oil supplies exists in these pulled up areas, right? Some of them are very accessible, like in Saudi Arabia, and a lot of them are very difficult to access. And some of them, or a lot of them, are actually drilled out, capped, and ready to go. But what happened was the environment was very technical, like, say, Arctic drilling, for one. There's not much oil production that comes out of the Arctic, but there are probably dozens or hundreds of wellheads that have been drilled out and placed in the Arctic at this point, right? So what happened was, is in a high price environment, when oil companies had a lot of extra cash, they spent the billions of dollars necessary to drill out these wells and get the access ready, and then they just plug them up essentially and leave and don't come back, because say if oil price is at $60 a barrel or $50 a barrel, the job to drill that well might have cost $90 a barrel. So they're not going to cash in and extract that oil yet. That's a future investment. They're going to wait until oil prices hit $100, $120 a barrel, where it actually makes sense to then remove that oil, and then on their balance sheets, this was profitable. But if they remove that oil and sell it in a low price environment, they're operating at a loss. So in terms of global oil supply, uh, oil will probably last at this point. The way the world's going, I feel like it'll last longer than humanity will. There's hundreds of years of oil supply left in the world. In the U.S., a lot of these frackers say that they have about 30 years, but the reasoning for that is more financial than it is like realistic. If they report any more than 30 years of reserves, then it's seen on the financial markets that they're not operating at the level they should be. They should be extracting more, and it labels them as a target for takeover. So in order to like avoid that, they all basically say we have 30 years supply. So I think there's plenty. But in any case, I think a lot of alternative energy sources will be fully developed by the time it does run out in like 100 or 200 years.
Another economical question when we have another two, and then we will move to geopolitics. So there's a lot of worry about a recession coming soon, with inflation at 8% and GDP grow at 2, while companies have debt to pay. What are the expectations for an economy going forward?
I'm not sure which economy this is. Like, is this a global economy or the U.S.? Well, I mean, I guess I can kind of answer for both. Like, so the U.S. economy is at a higher level of inflation than that. I think it's at like 9.1% now. In terms of GDP growth, these projections, I'm more and more convinced that they're political numbers. And they're I don't think GDP is going to grow 2%. Really, very much anywhere. I think in most places, in most industrialized or Western countries, it's probably going to retract by the end of the year, or be close to dead even. Like with, and I'm not sure what I'm not too familiar with the numbers like at this exact moment, but in terms of like debts and an economy, I think a big and underrated problem that no one here is talking about is demographics, and the reason for that being is you have so many people in America, which is a great inflection point because it's the wealthiest country in the world. They have this massive boomer generation, which is making all the money. The vast majority of the money in America is soaked in by the boomer generation, and the vast majority of investment that's in the financial markets is their money. Like, so I mean, if you leave aside the 1%, like the wealthy parts of the American population are on the verge of retirement or already retired. So when they fully retire, which this year 2022 is the year that most baby boomers will be moved into the retirement category, people tend to move their money out of high risk stocks and assets like that, and then to more low risk assets because they're not trying to lose their retirement and their life savings like after they've already retired. Like once you retired, you have $300,000-$400,000 from these big investments you've made on Tesla or whatever, Nvidia or whatever the big tech company is that you've been investing in. You pull that money out, you put it into low risk bonds and stuff to earn a little bit of interest. Maybe a lot of people just throw it in their bank accounts, or maybe IRAs, or you name, or just retirement funds in general that can distribute the money out for them. So a lot of that wealth that these corporations have access to, this excess wealth, and everyone talks about these bubbles, that's all, like, people are withdrawing that money. A lot of it's going to go away. So I imagine that if a bad recession does come and the stock market does crash, a lot of the money that has gone back into the stock market after the crashes over the last couple decades is not going to return this time. So I think that a recession could end up in America, at least, to be like very bad in terms of the number of companies that end up going down permanently.
Okay,
that's just
DPA.
my personal prediction. I'm not, I'm just a guy.
DPA is happy for your prediction about oil and gas. So I said that is not his problem about oil. So okay, so another one, and when we move already have about 4 or 5 questions, like to stay under the time that we said for the panel. So also Alex can answer, but this is the last one. Let's say if you have okay, Yazid, what do you think about the Nigerian gas pipeline project that will go up to Europe from Morocco, that could replace Russian gas? I will put an image like that I already shared in the last stream, if you can answer. Okay, this was the situation of gas from Africa. So the pipeline,
Trans-Saharan pipeline.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like possible. I mean, like, so a lot of these my issue to start is a lot of these solutions they're coming up with for these problems are not immediate solutions. Like, people don't really understand how long it takes to develop energy infrastructure. It is so complex and so technical. Like, I mean, there's so much engineering and construction, and I mean, some of these pipelines, this is like some of the harshest territory environment in the world that they're sending this pipeline through. So I imagine that comes with increased costs of its own. But to add on to that, there's a great deal of I guess you could say, Al Qaeda, like, terrorist activity in this part of the world, and it would need to be cleaned up to a certain extent for something like this to even be viable, which is definitely possible. And I'm not saying it's impossible. The train's impossible either, because, like, if you saw, like, the actual distances of these pipelines that go through Siberia, it's way more than this here. But I mean, this, for something like this to get done, this is like a multi-decade project if it hasn't already been started. I'm not aware of this particularly. I'm just giving you my assessment based on this information.
Okay, just for the public. So the purple one, just for you to understand why it will be very interesting, the situation about the contrast between the two massive importer of foreign gas, Italy and Germany. You can check, like, the Germany, it's completely tied on Russia, 100%. This is the reason why every deal that it will be made about Ukraine, it depends by Germany. You can see that Italy, we have a multiple way to import gas. I didn't show you this one in advance, but this one, the tap from Baku, it's already made. We are importing gas from Azerbaijan through Turkey, Greece, and Albany. But also this other one, the green one and the purple one, it's still active. Also the orange. So we are we can easily import from Algeria, Libya, and whatever. But as you say, the problem is that Northern Africa is not the most stable environment in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Libya is still not stable. We are still importing from it, but it's very problematic. So,
yeah, I mean, there were street battles in Tripoli 3 days ago. I mean, it very much looks like it was falling into a state of chaos. I haven't seen any more news on it lately, but it looked like one of the many different factions at war there was on the verge of collapse. So that could be a problem for Italy if.
Okay. Yazid was talking about not Trans-Saharan, but through Morocco. But as Jan said in advance, Yazid, the problem is that this pipeline, it's like it's not a 1 week project. Also, if you plan and it's a safe environment, it takes years. As we already said the last time, power of Siberia 2. For reaching the maximum capacity of 35 million cubic meters to import to China, it will take 3 years. And the pipeline is already made. Imagine if you have to plan one pipeline from zero. It's not an immediate solution. Alex, if you want to.
And also, like you said, it's only between Russia and China. There's only 2 countries involved in the African pipeline. There's there's Nigeria, Niger, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia. It's 5 countries already, without counting the security issues. So every country has to be on board, and everything is more complicated. So it won't be a fast solution.
I think probably an underrated or a missed factor, an external factor here is Algeria and Morocco. The 2 countries absolutely hate each other, and in a world like where there's a lot of disorder and you have where the Americans aren't able to play whack-a-mole with all these wars going on around the world, a war breaking out between Algeria and Morocco is actually very possible. It's a very interesting subject. You guys should look into it. Like, there's some YouTube videos and some history on it, but they don't like each other. And on Google Earth, you can actually look at the border between the two. There are massive, extensive trench lines across the entire border throughout the desert.
But yeah, you know what you say is very interesting, because not only is the border between the two countries still today not official, so this might be problematic. But the other thing is that imagine a country wanted to sabotage this entire project, you would just have to spark fighting at the border, and it essentially stops. So if some country in the world doesn't want this pipeline to be effective, or even provoke people in Niger or in these areas there, you could like sabotage a bit this entire project. Interesting.
Yeah, totally agree.
And it's interesting also because a lot of people doesn't know about what is Western Sahara and Front Polisario. So
that's a whole other.
Yeah, it's another frozen conflict like the Russian and the Soviet. So, okay, Yazid, I didn't get it because your question, if you can be more precise about why should Russia try to invest it, probably in the pipeline, but if you can ask it in a better way, because I'm not able to understand.
We're talking about the North African pipelines, right?
Probably.
Well, so just off the top of my head, I mean, Russia has pretty good very good relations with Algeria, and decent relations with one of the factions in Libya. I'm not sure, but like Russian mercenaries have played a big part in the civil war in Libya. So, I mean, Russia has probably like political and international interests in North Africa, just like they do around the Mediterranean. People don't really realize, but like even though Russia doesn't really have a presence in the Mediterranean, they are, I would say, a Mediterranean power, because they do have quite a bit of power projection, especially on the southern parts of the Mediterranean. So it might be in support of like local governments, you know, like or like we'll extend loans to Libya, or we'll extend loans to Tunisia or Algeria for pipelines. Like they might have some involvement in those governments for that, but if I mean, they definitely wouldn't invest if they assessed that a pipeline like that would provide a direct challenge to their energy export business. So if they are investing in it, it tells me that they don't think it is a challenge, or maybe they don't think it'll happen. I'm not sure.
Okay, technically, like from the Syria support of Russia in the war in Syria, they still have like Tartus base. That is the only base outside Russia in the Mediterranean. So technically they have presence, but it was the last one that was active from the Soviet time. So let's move to the like geopolitical question and answer. I have one question for me, miracle. So okay, what do you think will the result of the upcoming Italian election, and how will it affect the geopolitics in Europe? Okay, let's say to the public that is not Italian. Okay, you can check how many government we had from 1948, probably more than 40. So we are used to have multiple governments in one legislature, because Italian it's like a parliamentary republic. We don't elect the government, we elect the parliament. So last parliament we got 3 governments in 4 years. So it's very easy to change a government in Italy. In this case, the government was such a kind of a great coalition, like in Germany. There were all the parties except one that it's right-wing parties, that it's like Brothers of Italy, Fratelli d'Italia. So all the other parties were together in this government. Why the government collapsed? You have to think that the government were able to stay maximum 2-3 months more, because there was the time for the election already in March, probably maximum. So we will have the election of 25th of September. And the situation is very fluid. Why? Because now we will have for the first time a parliament that it will be cut off 50%, because there was a law where the Senate and Parliament were cut off. It's like a a populist law, because nothing will change about really the cost of the parliament, but we will have all the electoral law and the new parliament. So let's say that nobody is understanding what will happen. The center-right coalition have for the polls about 5-7 points more in the polls. So probably we will have a center-right government, but nobody knows, because election in Italy, it's every time a surprise. What could change? So you can understand magically how Russian geopolitics is influencing also the internal policy of European Parliament, of European countries. Sorry. The day after of the collapse of the Italian government, technically the government is still in power. It's the parliament that is not in power now. We will have the election of a new parliament, but the government is still in power for the administrative things and whatever. The day after, the export of Russian gas on the border, eastern border of Italy, increased 70%. Not 7 or 17, plus 70%. So it was a little signal of a Soviet Champanska that was opening in Moscow. Because why? Not because the Italian government, because Draghi was one of the biggest supporter of the sanction to Russia. So this is why, for example, what can I say to you? It's like Italy. Let's say it's pretty safe about the gas import, because we still have a big company, that is Eni, that have it's one of the only not US companies that was on the international market. You can check about it. It was the only one, not of the Seven Sisters, that was able to make direct contract, for example, in Kazakhstan or Russia, or during the Soviet Union, or it's in Azerbaijan, or whatever. It's everywhere. So what I think that it will be, the Italian campaign will not be made for sure about the Ukraine issues, because it's not still in the news. Let's say it's second, third, fourth news in Italy now. Everything it's like on the government, on economical issues, and if I can say to you, now in August it's like summertime, nobody care about nothing in Italy, it's holiday time, and inflation, economical problem or whatever will come in September, October, after the holidays. And magically the election, it's on 25th of September. It's very fast. It will be difficult to make like the electoral debates and everything during the summer. So I think that nothing will change about the situation in Ukraine, about that is concerned about the Italian politics. I still on this position that the real wave that can move the balance will be Germany, because Germany will be in trouble soon. Especially we are already talking about gas and energy containment. In Italy, nobody is talking about it. And if Germany will have problem in about industries and energy for production, it will be a mess, because all the European production is interconnected with Germany, especially Italy. As I already said in a lot of streamings, a lot of parts in Germany is made in Italy and assembled in Germany, especially like automotive or whatever.
Yeah. So hey, real quick question to follow up with that about Italian politics. So what are the chances that the Brothers of Italy party manage to gain a majority and lead a coalition for the next government? And then if that did happen, what policy changes do you think that they would make concerning, international?
Do you want gossip or real politics?
Give me the gossip. That sounds way more interesting.
Okay, it's very interesting, because the crisis in Italy was generated by a party that is called Five Star Movement, that didn't vote for one. Let's say it was merely an administrative vote. It was not nothing important, but
it was like a trash incinerator in Rome, right?
No, but
something like that.
No, that one was inside this vote, but it was not the priority. It was like let's say a move to say we can make the government in trouble. Let's say something like this. And Draghi said, I will not make a government without a five-star movement. But we, like the government had the majority without this party. So Draghi stayed like into this line. I will not make another government like Draghi 2 without five-star movement. And after this one, something happened very unpredictable, because the day after there was three parties in the coalition that didn't vote. Let's say two, because one was brother of Italy, Fratelli d'Italia, it was already in the opposition, and Lega Nord and Forza Italia, that is like Berlusconi party. You have to check in the gossip part. This is only gossip. Okay. The Lega Nord party had a lot of connection with Russia. There was also a big scandal about this, let's say, money connection in, but it's very famous. You can check Lega Nord Metropolitan Hotel Moscow. You can see what is it. About let's say 3 years ago. So there was a lot of tie with and there was a direct agreement between Lega Nord and United Russia about cooperation. Nothing very deep, but nobody knows what is in this agreement. And Berlusconi was strictly friends of Putin, and is still. And Fratelli d'Italia was, let's say, a little bit supportive of the Putin type of government. So we don't know what will happen, because this is only gossip, but magically the two parties that were more connected with Russian parties had like a role in the collapse of the government. Magically, the day after, plus 70% of gas import in Italy. So it's only gossip, it's not truth, but but magically happened like this. I had to move to the other question, like to stay in time. So this is from previous stream that we didn't answer. Okay. So there are rumors that LNR will hold a referendum in October to join Russia. Could that mean an Ukrainian attack on Lugansk is an attack on Russia and start mobilization?
Alex, I'll let you go first.
Alex, go. It's your field.
Yeah, I don't see how Ukraine right now could attack Luhansk. I mean, right now they can't, like, they attack at Kherson. Nothing huge happened there. I don't see them attack where half the Russian army is. Like, this is where the bulk of the Russian forces are in Luhansk. I don't see them taking back this ground.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good assessment, and there's like this overall like rumor that you know, if Ukraine attacks Russian territory, that it might be an excuse for the Russian government to mobilize their forces and escalate the war. And I just don't buy it. I think that the Russians are going to escalate when they want to escalate. You know, I don't think that they're waiting for any kind of excuse. I'm sure that these cross-border attacks and these shellings of border towns in Kursk and Belgorod and like some of these places are certainly going to be cited once Russia does decide to mobilize or send more forces into the fight. But I think they're going to do it when they're damn ready to do it. You know, I don't think that there's anything Ukrainians are going to do to provoke it. I mean, they would have to make a pretty serious incursion and to say like Kursk or like a core Russian territory for Russia to react like that and say, okay, we're sending the army in.
Even then, we're talking about a mobilization. But we talked about it last stream. We talked about it last stream. The Russians already hire volunteers. They give them more money. They already have this rotation of troops, and they're reaching their objectives. Of course, it's slow, but if they were to mobilize, a lot of people in Russia would be against the military operation, and you would have to take people. Who would you take for army duty? Like software engineers, or who do you take? So it's
Right.
a
I think
you
it would
would,
first be the reserve forces, like the people, the 2 million strong that have already
but
served.
that's what they're doing already. This is why
Yeah.
people's, like we talked about, the FSB or secret services, whatever, border guards. Most FSB are border guards, but border guards that are in Kazakhstan and they're not doing anything. You go, oh, you can go to Ukraine, but these guys
Yeah.
already have some sort of military training. And because if you bring people like normal everyday people from the big cities, they will not be happy. They say, okay, we can follow you through this war and reduce our expectations, but don't send us.
Right.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
This is another one that is still connected. I don't know about this law, but it's like Russia passed a war for the economic mobilization. Okay, a law for the economic mobilization for war. What impact will it have?
So
If
my
you know.
understanding of the law is it's a return to more Soviet times, which isn't necessarily like a bad thing in terms of like I mean, America had like similar economic mobilization laws and stuff. It's basically like the government requests something from the industry, they have to obey it. It's like kind of like what's going on. So like these industries are still like privately owned for the most part, but like they have to actually conform to like government demands now. So like that makes it easier to be like, we need 1,000,000 AKs and we need them now, like make demands like that. But like essentially, I believe this is similar, the same question that I was answering in our chat earlier. But probably what Russia will focus on, and it seems to me like the main primary need is infantry equipment and modern infantry equipment. So body armor, night vision, modern AKs, and which doesn't seem like a big deal, but like the newest versions of AKs with like the Picatinny rail, it's like similar to what like American M4s and stuff have on it. It allows for virtually like any kind of attachments you want to the gun. So like night optics, scopes, lasers, you name it, the whole 9 yards, like the things that make like a modern weapon a little more effective. So they need millions of those in order to equip their army and have like backups, right? So they need a lot of new assault rifles, body armor, and quadcopters is probably like a big one, along with the night vision. Night vision is huge now. And I would suggest that maybe even silencers would be a big part of that. Like you see the American military, specifically the Marines, I believe, is moving wholesale to silencers on all their weapons. There's just not that. And this might be untrue. We might need like an opinion from some weapons expert, if only we knew one. On the effect of like silencers on a gun. But like there's a lot of like I guess you could say like accuracy effects, but I think the Marines have determined that it's not enough to negate the advantages of having like fully suppressed, platoon like in combat or something like that. So for the heavy equipment, obviously Russia's like got no shortage of tanks. But I think any kind of industrial mobilization will be concentrated on getting those lines, those production lines for Su-57s, T-90s, and maybe even T-14s, like running at like higher rates. I think that the Su-57s would definitely be a priority. That'll be if they could maintain supply lines for like the chips and stuff that they need for them. That would be a huge advantage for Russia on the front line. Just the cost comparison for their 5th generation fighter to say F-35s or it's they can make 4 to 1. So it doesn't matter if the F-35 is better. They can if they're getting destroyed at a 2 to 1 ratio versus the F-35, they're winning in terms of costs. So that'll be a priority. But I'm really like this is probably a long-term thing. Like you're probably not going to see like major changes in terms of like in military industrial production for Russia, like for about a year, maybe like within a year, like you'll see like some big differences if this is what we think it is.
Thanks to me and B that you like our stream and you say to like our stream. Okay, so put like.
Thanks, me and B.
So put like also to New York Econ and History Legends because they are super supporters. So other technical question: what are your thoughts on the missile strike on Odessa? Because the two parts, the two sides, it's like the Ukrainian side said that was a deliberate attack to the harbor, and the Russian part said that was like to a military object, not like a civil. So,
yeah, well,
Jan and Alex.
The Russian side, they're telling the truth. They struck military and potentially military infrastructure. I believe there was a number of tugboats along with naval patrol vessels that were hit. But it's definitely like an opinion that's coming from the West, which is definitely true. Is this was definitely intended to be a slap in the face to the UN or the Western powers that got this deal up and going. And before I elaborate on that, I do want to say that I don't believe that this violated any part of the treaty that was signed between Turkey, the UN, Ukraine, and then Russia. Because the treaty was for grain export and they would avoid, hitting these civilian targets. But the targets they hit were military, but it was definitely intended to throw their weight around and show like, we're not going to stop striking Odessa. We're not going to, you're not going to take this opportunity to send your patrol boats out into the Black Sea and like harass, we're still in charge. This is still our show. I definitely think that that's the intention of these strikes. Cause really tugboats and patrol boats is not like, the missiles that hit them probably cost more than they did. Like some of these cruise missiles, you're looking at like $50 million for them, and like there's no way you're paying that for one of these patrol boats. It was definitely them throwing their weight around. Alex?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, some people were saying, yeah, they want to stop the grain or whatever, but I'm like, okay, I think it was just some sort of warning, just to show that yes, they can hit it, and they didn't do it before. In a way, like they could have targeted this place a long time ago. They didn't, and now it's just a show of force. Like a lot of things in this PR war, we see it. I see it as a show of force, and like you said, target a small military infrastructure. Hopefully, with no people, with no one there. Perhaps just the boats were there. They just fired at and just to.
Another technical question, when we will put the last 2-3 questions, fast answer to stay under the time that we said. So this is Yazid. So I saw some recent satellite image of operating Ukrainian airports with a few fighter jets then can be seen. While Russia is struggling with establishing air superiority, we had like some add to this question. Okay. Kappa Klaus said because Ukraine have air defense system, and Yazid put another okay. Then why we see calibers flying all over the country, but we're not able to strike their air bases? So, Alex?
So, from what I've read, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what people imagine is that Ukraine has 2 airports or 2 airfields. The country has so many of them. And what Ukrainian fighter jets have been doing is that they're constantly rotating. So they would take off from one place and land at another, and they're always switching from one place to another. So the Russians, they can bomb some places, but if they really want to target the aircraft, these things are always on rotation. And but the moment the airspace has a missile, these guys jump in a plane and move and go to another place. So for the Russians, it's really hard.
Yeah, That sounds pretty accurate to me. Honestly, just the nature of the terrain you're fighting on, Ukraine is massive and flat, and the MiG-29 was designed to take off from dirt runways. Like it can operate out of a freaking cornfield, honestly, like in an extreme scenario. So it wouldn't be like some crazy difficult operation to like hide your fighter jets. And in terms of Russia, like bombing runways, it's not very cost effective. I mean, you can bomb a runway one day, and then 4 days later, they just take bulldozers and fill the hole in with dirt and all the debris that you flew everywhere, and then they even it out and they can be used again. So
it's the same with the railroads. The Russians started launching missiles on the railroads, but they can be repaired so fast and for cheap that at the end of the day, they're like, okay, it's useless. Same thing for airfields. Yeah.
I would honestly say that the railroads are a better target than the airfields in terms of like the amount of supplies that move on any kind of rail line. Like shutting down supplies for a couple days is a lot more valuable than shutting down any given runway for a couple days, just based on how much air support that Ukraine could even throw in. They just don't have. They have obviously more planes in the air than like anyone thought they would at this point. And I think the primary reason for that is just mothballed equipment that they've cannibalized. Like there's probably hundreds and hundreds of MiGs and Su-25s within Ukraine that were not usable and not counted in their inventory before the war started, which is probably what they're operating now.
Okay, first question, are there Italian volunteers in the Ukrainian war? Which side do they support the most? And then Alex is specialized about this, but I can tell you the official and the unofficial count. The Russians technically said that there is like 61 on field with 11 deaths, but the real count, like from Italy, it's that there is about 17 with 1 death. It's like both sides. So the number it's very low, about 17 people, and normally I saw most of them. For example, it's like pro-Russian in this count. There is also a famous reporter that is called Vittorio Rangeloni that has his own channel in Telegram. Is working in Donbass, especially from Donetsk, from mostly 6-7 years. So if I can answer to you directly, there is very few, and it's more volunteer. It's not mercenaries. We don't have like this thing like Wagner Group or whatever, or so. And rarely heard about Italian mercenaries. This is the reason. So Alex, if you can say like shortly what is like the most part of mercenaries, because I know that you made a video about it.
Yeah, they're paid. Most guys that go there, they're paid, but it's not a lot. Like from the people I talk to, they don't do it for the money because the money is not great. So they do it because they want to go, not because of the money. So it depends on how you see it. And now for Western Europeans, it's just much easier to go fight for Ukraine than to go fight for the other side. And also, if they come back, well, if they fight for Russia and come back, they're going to be in deep trouble. Whereas if they go fight for Ukraine and come back.
Okay. If Alex, if I can say about the Italian law, also if you come back for Ukraine, you will have trouble.
But less. Let's be honest. You will have trouble, but a bit less. But less than if you were with the opposite side.
I think that if you are fighting with Russia, it's very difficult that you return back to Italy.
Exactly.
But like I have like really news about like people that got tribunal process, everything, because you cannot for the Italian law come back for a foreign country. Anyway, so any country, it's not possible for our laws.
I believe it's that way in the UK as well. They warned at the beginning of the year for their people not to go There's like some old law that a citizen of the United Kingdom cannot fight for a foreign military, or something like that. I could be mistaken, but it's interesting what you say that Italy isn't well known or isn't known at all for mercenaries now, because they used to be one of the, like, historically speaking, one of the most well known for mercenaries. Genoan mercenaries actually held the front line for the final siege of Constantinople before it fell to the Ottomans. So it's very, very interesting how that's collapsed through the centuries, and now they don't have very much military prowess.
No, it's because we switched mainly from like a high number army to a professional one, and but this thing about Constantinople was, I don't know, centuries ago. Now we switched to wine and food conflict, not military anymore. But I'm kidding. But still, Italy, if you check about weapon export, we are still in the top 6, top 5 in the world. So it's very complicated issue. So what is the support like population of Ukraine currently in Italy and Europe at large? If I can say, as I said, in Italy, actually the Ukrainian issue, it's like second, third news in the newspaper, everything. The things that I'm feeling, it's like that more is going over the conflict, and more of attention it's going into an inertial phase. At the beginning, the first 2-3 months, but I think also in the US, it's going down and down, it will be a problem. And this is why, for example, the activity also of Zelensky and the communication of Ukrainian government at the beginning was fundamental for them, because now, if you can check about how many interviews or whatever you have about Zelensky in Europe, it's not so much. So I think that the attention of this conflict, more we go through the winter, and more is going lower and lower about the war effect on field, and more about the effect of the sanction on both sides. Because sanction, it will be affect a lot Russian economy. It's still affecting now, but will affect also Europe. As Jan said in the other streams, the big winner of this situation economically, it's US, because it's like trying to cutting the tie between Europe and Russia, but it's difficult. I think it will not happen. But at the moment, we are disconnected for a political reason. But like geographically, it's very difficult to,
they can never be
connect.
Disconnected, yeah.
So the question for the panel, and we will close. This is like very, very interesting and difficult question. So let's try to answer for the panel. What are the odds of Putin's planned multipolar war succeeding? So, Jan, Alex, it's yours.
You want to go first? All right. I think it's in the context of a multipolar world order, like similar to the current world order that's unipolar, obviously, with the U.S. Being the primary mover of all things political in the UN. I don't think it's possible at all. I think as far as a multipolar world, it seems like we're already moved into that. That's already succeeded. But replacing the global world order with something new, in my mind, is going to fail catastrophically. Which probably isn't even. It's not, that fact's probably not lost on Putin. He probably realizes that this is just going to completely like there's not going to be really a forum for people to bring their grievances to anymore. I mean, the UN might continue to exist, but I mean, in my opinion, it's already a joke. And it will. The longer it holds on in its current form, the more of a joke it is. Like, it has no authority. It's incredibly corrupt. It's just this place. I don't even know.
Yeah. Let's think about how many wars and genocides the UN has stopped since its invention. Like,
none.
that was their main job, and So
Yeah, it just seems like a corrupt institution that some countries have found as a useful way to impose their will. And I'm not like calling anyone out like specifically, and I'm obviously like a patriot and I love my country, but I think there are certain interests within certain countries have used the UN to their advantage and to the disadvantage of a lot of different peoples around the world. And as far as an institution, I don't think it has nearly the credibility that it thinks it itself has. Like I think that people like globalists and internationalists look at the UN and they see it as this thing that's supposed to be like the end all be all of like geopolitics. Like it was supposed to stop and end here. Like the game was supposed to be over, and this is eventually what we should move into, and eventually the UN should have authority over sovereign nations. And you've seen like suggestions and attempts at this, like different UN agencies should have authority, like most recently, and not to get into this topic at all, but like some people are suggesting that like the World Health Organization should have authority over how sovereign nations, do their health policy when it comes to pandemics and things like that. And honestly, it's complete disconnect from reality. Like nobody wants that. Nobody wants the WHO stepping in and bossing around countries, because who was funding the WHO? Like other countries, like might be your enemy. Like they receive funding from China, they receive funding from the US. If the US is being given orders from the WHO to do something, a lot of people in the US are going to be like, this is influenced by China, and vice versa. Like China's not going to obey that stuff. So like, I mean, these institutions have no authority, and honestly, they run on inertia. And I think their existence is on borrowed time. Just my opinion. All right.
Okay, so before the ending, the next streams will be soon. I will tell you. I have like a last question to close. Okay. This it's only like because you made it before and I missed it, but will the European able to avoid freezing in the winter if Russia cuts export to to the European Union? I already answered about it. That the average storage in July it's about 66% in the European Union. So the main problem will be the storage of Germany. So the last question that I will put, it's made by JCC, but it's an affirmation only to make the point of view of Jan and Alex, and then I will close it with the last slide. So true, US is winning. We didn't say that US is winning. I said that the main purpose of the US foreign policy was to cut the tie between Europe and Russia, not that US is winning. Also, China, Europe, and Russia screw up big time. If we can answer to this, Alex, Jan.
Yeah,
about like the position of China and Russia, but in this geopolitical moment.
I think China is surprisingly been playing the whole situation very intelligently so far. They haven't really made any moves or done anything. Like there's a lot of speculation about what China might do, but I mean, so far they've just kind of sat back and kicked their feet back and are just watching everything unfold. There might that in its own could be a mistake on China's part. Like it's really difficult to tell like what's going on in China, what's coming out of China. But I've been reading like some stuff that suggests like things in China might not be good. And to be honest, in terms of global food prices, like they're by far the most exposed. They have nowhere near enough food to feed their population. They have to import all of it. So as far as I mean, it's difficult to say. I think Europe's definitely screwing up. That's that I think they've made some big mistakes here in terms of putting their reliance on energy on Russia, and then thinking that they can just yank that reliance and sanction Russia in the way that they have and cut off the energy. It is incredibly stupid. They should have either A, never put all their eggs in that basket to begin with, or B, like when the situation unfolded, just to have like ate the bullet and been like, well, this is what we signed up for. We signed up for this Russian energy. There's nothing we could do about it, and kind of, shoo away all this pressure to put sanctions on energy. I think that those would have been the two best options, and they tried to go in between, which is like a huge mistake. But that's all I got on that.
Yeah, and just
Alex?
the only thing I can say is I think when they started putting sanctions is when Russia was in deep trouble in Ukraine, so the operation didn't go as planned, and they saw it as a weakness. They thought that Russia would pull back. They thought that they would have the upper hand, and they didn't think it would last so long. They thought it would last a couple of weeks and something like that. But now that the thing is dragging on to the winter, I don't think they expected this to go that the war would be going in that direction.
Okay, so let's close my prediction. I didn't predict anything from till now, but I will close with a prediction, and then I will give you the last thing, and we will close. So this is two books that I want to suggest. One is Break Up Nation. I have the Italian version here. It's a pretty old book. It's more than 10 years ago. If you check about the prediction about the situation in Russia, about the economical issues, I think that it did a very good prediction about the situation. The All and the Glory of Steve Levine, I'm trying to making a stream with him as soon as possible. He's one of my favorite authors. He lived in the Soviet Union. His wife is from Kazakhstan, so he stayed during the collapse of Soviet Union. He had a lot of stories to tell about what happened around the Caspian Sea, and everything that also Jan said about Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, everything that is connected about what happened at the end of the Soviet Union and in Russia. The next stream will be the 20th of July this week, 8 a.m. The Central Europe time. This strange hour is because the stream will be with Philip Longley from Australia. So this is this strange time. So we will wait you for this stream. If you have any other question about the presentation of Jan, please send to the comments after, because we are collecting everything and put to the next streams. So follow the channel, follow New World Econ, follow History Legends, and we will wait you to the next stream. Ciao.
Bye, everyone.